The prison doors slammed shut with a sound so loud it echoed through every hallway. Outside, dozens of flashing police cars lit up the night. Federal agents rushed through the entrance while frightened correctional officers stood frozen. Boxes of secret files were carried away. Locked computers were unplugged. Security cameras that had been recording for years were suddenly taken as evidence. One officer whispered only 6 words before being placed in handcuffs. "They know everything. It's over." For years, everyone believed Blackstone State Prison was one of the safest prisons in America. News reporters praised its strict security. State leaders pointed to it as an example of how prisons should be run. Families believed their loved ones inside were being watched every second. But behind those concrete walls, something much darker had been growing. It was not just one dishonest officer. It was not just one bad decision. It was a prison corruption scandal so deep that powerful people would do almost anything to keep it hidden. Money disappeared. Evidence vanished. Dangerous inmates received special treatment. Honest workers were suddenly transferred or forced to quit. Every strange event looked like an accident. Every question was quickly buried. And now, federal investigators had finally walked through the front gate. But as one agent opened a locked office hidden behind the prison administration building, he found something that made everyone stop talking. Inside was a steel cabinet that should never have existed. Its contents would change everything they believed about Blackstone State Prison. Then the lights suddenly went out. Someone inside the prison did not want that cabinet to be opened. 3 months earlier, Blackstone State Prison looked completely normal. Officer Ethan Carter had worked there for nearly 8 years. He believed in following the rules. He treated inmates fairly but firmly. Other officers respected him because he never accepted shortcuts. He believed every prison needed honesty if it was going to stay safe. His wife, Sarah, often asked him why he stayed at such a stressful job. "Because someone has to do it right," Ethan always answered. Most days were quiet. Officers counted inmates, checked doors, escorted prisoners to work assignments, and completed paperwork. Everything followed a strict schedule. Cameras watched nearly every hallway. Locked gates opened only after careful security checks. At least, that was what everyone believed. One afternoon, Ethan noticed something unusual. An inmate named Marcus Hill walked through a security gate without the normal inspection. Marcus was serving a long sentence for organized financial crimes. He was known for being calm, smart, and careful. Every officer knew his name. Yet the officer at the checkpoint simply nodded and let him pass. No metal detector. No search. No questions. Ethan frowned. "Did I miss something?" he quietly asked. The other officer shrugged. "Orders from above." "Whose orders?" "You don't ask." The answer bothered Ethan all day. Later that week, he noticed another strange event. Several expensive packages arrived at the prison loading dock. Their paperwork listed them as maintenance supplies, but they were never delivered to the maintenance department. Instead, 2 supervisors personally loaded the boxes into an unmarked storage room that very few employees could enter. When Ethan checked the inventory system, those packages didn't exist. It was as if they had never arrived. He told himself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe the records had not been updated. Maybe the supervisors were handling a special project. Still, something didn't feel right. Days turned into weeks. Small mysteries kept piling up. Security cameras were suddenly under repair whenever certain inmates moved between buildings. Visitor logs contained missing names. Night shift schedules changed without explanation. One honest officer suddenly announced his retirement, even though he had planned to work for 5 more years. Nobody talked about it. Everyone acted like nothing unusual had happened. One evening, Ethan stayed late to finish paperwork. As he walked through a quiet hallway, he heard voices coming from an office that should have been empty. He recognized one voice immediately. It belonged to Deputy Warden Richard Lawson. The second voice was lower and unfamiliar. Ethan stopped near the closed door. Then he heard words that made his heart race. "No more mistakes," Lawson said quietly. "If anyone finds the records, every one of us goes down." A heavy folder slammed onto the desk. Ethan carefully looked through the small window in the office door. His eyes widened. Deputy Warden Lawson was feeding stacks of official prison documents into a paper shredder. And sitting beside him on the desk was a thick binder stamped in bold red letters. Confidential. Internal investigation. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he thought the people inside the office would hear it. He stayed perfectly still. Deputy Warden Richard Lawson pushed another stack of papers into the shredder. The machine growled as page after page disappeared forever. The man standing across from him glanced nervously toward the office door. "We should have destroyed these months ago," the man whispered. Lawson shook his head. "We kept them because we thought we might need them. Now they're a danger. What if someone already knows?" "They don't." Ethan slowly stepped backward, careful not to make a sound. One wrong move could expose him. He reached the corner of the hallway and quietly walked away, forcing himself not to run. Once outside, he took a deep breath. He knew what he had seen. Someone inside Blackstone State Prison was destroying official records. The next morning, Ethan acted as if nothing had happened. He greeted officers, checked security gates, and completed inmate counts just like every other day. But now he watched everything more closely. He noticed Officer Kevin Brooks, one of Lawson's closest friends, carrying sealed envelopes between offices without signing them into the prison log. He noticed maintenance workers entering secure areas without being searched. He noticed cameras that always seemed to stop recording at the exact moments certain inmates were moved. Each event alone could have been explained. Together, they painted a different picture. At lunch, Ethan sat with Officer Daniel Harris, a veteran guard who had worked at Blackstone for over 20 years. Daniel leaned closer and spoke quietly. "You're asking too many questions." Ethan looked surprised. "I've barely said anything." "You don't have to. People notice." Ethan lowered his voice. "Something isn't right here." Daniel looked around the cafeteria before answering. "I used to think the same thing. What changed?" Daniel's face became serious. "My best friend worked here. Officer Michael Turner. Honest man. One day he found something he wasn't supposed to see." "What happened to him?" "He resigned 2 weeks later." "Why?" "He never told anyone." Daniel paused. 6 months after leaving, he disappeared. Ethan stared at him. Disappeared. No goodbye. No phone calls. His family reported him missing. "Was he ever found?" Daniel slowly shook his head. The room suddenly felt much colder. That evening, Ethan drove home without turning on the radio. Sarah noticed something was wrong the moment he walked through the front door. "You've hardly said a word." "I'm just tired." She smiled gently. "You always say that when you're worried." Ethan wanted to tell her everything. Instead, he simply hugged her. "If anything ever happened at work," she asked softly, "you'd tell me, right?" He hesitated. "I promise." Late that night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He opened his laptop and searched public records about Blackstone State Prison. Most articles praised the prison's excellent safety record. But one old newspaper story caught his attention. 5 years earlier, an anonymous employee had accused prison leaders of corruption. The investigation had been closed only 3 weeks later. Officials announced there was no evidence of wrongdoing. No names were ever released. No details were shared. The story simply disappeared. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Someone had tried to warn people years ago. The next afternoon, something unexpected happened. As Ethan finished escorting inmates back to their housing unit, Marcus Hill quietly spoke without looking at him. "You should stop asking questions." Ethan froze. "I don't know what you mean." Marcus kept walking. "They watch more than the cameras." "Who does?" Marcus didn't answer. Before entering his cell, he turned slightly. "If you want the truth, don't trust the people wearing the nicest uniforms." The steel door slammed shut. Ethan stood there thinking about those words. That evening, he checked the prison's digital records again. This time, he searched for the confidential investigation he had seen on the binder. Nothing appeared. He searched another database. Nothing. A third system. Still nothing. It was as if the investigation had never existed. Someone had erased every trace. Just before midnight, Ethan's work phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Officer Carter." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then a calm voice said only one sentence. "If you care about your family, stop looking." The line went dead. Ethan immediately called the number back. It had already been disconnected. He sat silently, staring at the phone. This was no longer about missing paperwork. Someone knew he was asking questions. Someone knew where to find him. The following morning, Ethan arrived early. As he walked across the employee parking lot, something caught his eye. His own car. The driver's side window had been left slightly open. He was certain he had locked it the night before. Slowly, he opened the door. Nothing appeared to be stolen. His wallet was still there. His work bag hadn't been touched. Then he noticed a plain white envelope resting on the driver's seat. No stamp. No address. Only his name written neatly across the front. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Ethan leaving his house with Sarah only 2 nights earlier. Across the bottom, someone had written 4 chilling words in black marker. "You're being watched next." Ethan stared at the photograph for several seconds. His hands felt cold. The picture had been taken outside his own home. It showed him locking the front door while Sarah smiled beside him, completely unaware that someone had been watching them. He quickly looked around the parking lot. Officers were walking to work. Cars were pulling into parking spaces. Everything looked normal. But now Ethan felt different. Someone had crossed a line. This was no longer just about corruption inside the prison. Whoever was behind it wanted him to be afraid. He slipped the photograph into his work bag without telling anyone. If he reported it to the wrong person, the people responsible might hear about it before an investigation even began. Inside Blackstone State Prison, the morning count started as usual. Metal gates opened. Keys rattled. Inmates lined up quietly. The loudspeaker echoed through the housing units. Everything appeared calm. Yet Ethan noticed something unusual almost immediately. Deputy Warden Richard Lawson was personally walking through the prison with 2 men wearing expensive suits. They were not correctional officers, and they did not have visible identification badges. Whenever they reached a security checkpoint, officers opened the gates without asking questions. No paperwork. No sign-in log. Nothing. Ethan watched from a distance. The visitors disappeared into a restricted office that was normally used for financial records. An hour later, they left carrying 2 locked briefcases. No one stopped them. No one even looked surprised. Later that afternoon, Ethan quietly visited the prison archives, where years of old maintenance records, employee files, and inspection reports were stored. The room smelled of old paper and dust. He searched for the internal investigation mentioned on the binder. Shelf after shelf held neatly labeled boxes. But one section caught his attention. Several storage boxes had labels. The shelves beside them had empty spaces. Tiny marks in the dust showed that other boxes had recently been removed. Someone had cleaned out part of the archive. As Ethan examined the shelves, an elderly records clerk named Linda Brooks entered the room. She had worked at Blackstone longer than almost anyone else. She noticed what Ethan was looking at. "Those boxes disappeared last month," she said quietly. "Who took them?" "I wasn't told." "Did you ask?" Linda gave a nervous smile. "I've learned not to." She started to leave, but suddenly stopped. Without looking at Ethan, she whispered, "If you're searching for the truth, look where nobody thinks to clean." Then she walked away. Her words stayed in Ethan's mind. That evening, after most employees had gone home, Ethan returned to the archive room. He searched behind filing cabinets. He checked old storage closets. Finally, he noticed a loose floor panel beneath a metal shelf. Carefully lifting it, he discovered a small waterproof envelope hidden underneath. Inside were several old documents. The first page listed unusual payments made over many years. Large amounts of money had been approved for repairs that never happened. Another page contained signatures. Some belonged to prison officials. Others belonged to companies Ethan had never heard of. Then he found a folded letter. It was written by Officer Michael Turner, the same honest officer who had disappeared years earlier. The letter was never finished. It read, "If anyone finds this, the corruption goes higher than most people believe. Certain inmates are receiving favors in exchange for money. Evidence is being destroyed before outside inspectors arrive. I have copied records because I know they may try to erase everything." The sentence ended there. The rest of the page had been torn away. Ethan carefully placed every document back into the envelope. These papers could prove that Michael Turner had been telling the truth. But they also proved something else. The corruption had been happening for years. As Ethan quietly left the archive room, he heard footsteps. He switched off his flashlight. 2 people entered the hallway. One voice belonged to Deputy Warden Lawson. The other belonged to Officer Kevin Brooks. "Did anyone check the archives?" Brooks asked. Lawson answered calmly. "We received information that something may still be hidden there." "What if someone finds it?" "They won't. And if they already have?" Lawson stopped walking. "Then we have a much bigger problem." The footsteps grew closer. Ethan held his breath behind the shelves. The flashlight beam swept across the room. For one terrifying moment, it stopped only a few feet away. Then Lawson spoke again. "Nobody's here." The 2 men left. Ethan waited several minutes before moving. He knew he could not keep the documents inside the prison. The next morning, before leaving for work, he made copies of every page and hid the originals in a safe place outside his home. He carried only 1 copy with him. His plan was simple. He would find someone outside Blackstone he could trust. But before he had the chance, the prison's emergency alarm suddenly blared through every building. Officers rushed toward cell block C. An inmate had collapsed during morning count. Medical staff arrived within seconds. Ethan pushed through the crowd. The inmate lying on the floor was Marcus Hill. His breathing was weak. As paramedics carefully lifted him onto a stretcher, Marcus opened his eyes just long enough to grab Ethan's sleeve. With his final bit of strength, he slipped a tiny folded piece of paper into Ethan's hand and whispered 3 words that changed everything. "The warden knows." Ethan closed his hand around the tiny piece of paper before anyone else could see it. Marcus Hill was quickly rolled down the hallway on a stretcher as medical staff hurried toward the prison clinic. Officers cleared the path, and inmates were ordered back into their cells. The emergency lasted only a few minutes. But for Ethan, everything had changed. "The warden knows." Those 3 words echoed in his mind. Did Marcus mean the warden knew about the corruption? Or was the warden leading it? Ethan couldn't risk opening the note in front of anyone. He slipped it into his pocket and forced himself to continue working as though nothing had happened. The rest of the morning felt unusually quiet. Too quiet. Officers spoke in short sentences. Supervisors walked through the housing units more often than usual. Even the inmates seemed to notice something was different. At lunch, Ethan stepped into an empty maintenance hallway where no security cameras were visible. He carefully unfolded the small piece of paper. Inside were only 2 lines. "Boiler room. Locker 27. There was no signature. No explanation. Just those words. Ethan folded the note and hid it again. He knew exactly where the old boiler room was. It was part of the original prison building, a place few employees visited anymore because newer equipment had replaced most of the old systems. That evening, after his shift ended, Ethan waited until the hallways became nearly empty. He walked toward the basement level. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. Old pipes lined the walls. The lights flickered overhead. The sound of humming machinery echoed through the concrete tunnels. Finally, he reached the old boiler room. Rows of dusty metal lockers stood against one wall. Most were unlocked and empty. Locker 27 was different. It still had a small combination lock. Ethan examined it carefully. Someone had scratched 3 tiny numbers into the metal beside the handle. 419. He turned the dial. The lock clicked open. Inside sat a worn cardboard box wrapped in plastic. His hands shook as he lifted it out. Inside were dozens of documents. Bank statements. Internal prison memos. Visitor records. Maintenance invoices. There was also a flash drive sealed inside a plastic evidence bag. Attached to it was a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, I couldn't expose them myself. Trust the records, not the rumors." There was no name, but Ethan recognized the handwriting. It matched Michael Turner's unfinished letter. Michael had hidden evidence before he disappeared. Ethan carefully looked through the papers. One financial report caught his attention. Large payments had been sent to companies that did not appear to provide any real services. Another document listed expensive security upgrades that had never been installed. Millions of taxpayer dollars appeared to have been approved over several years. Yet the prison buildings showed no sign of those improvements. Then Ethan found something even more shocking. A schedule. It showed dates when outside inspectors were expected to visit. Beside each date were handwritten instructions. Move selected inmates. Replace inventory sheets. Disable camera hall C. Return everything after inspection. Ethan stared at the page. This wasn't random corruption. It looked organized. Every inspection had been carefully managed to hide what was really happening inside Blackstone. He quickly packed everything back into the box. Just then, a loud metal door slammed somewhere behind him. Footsteps echoed through the basement. More than one person. Ethan switched off his flashlight. The voices grew louder. "Search every room," someone ordered. "We know somebody came down here." Ethan recognized the voice immediately. Deputy Warden Lawson. There was another voice too. The warden himself. "So," the warden said calmly, "our missing evidence may finally have surfaced." Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Marcus had been right. The warden knew. Maybe he had always known. Ethan quietly picked up the box and looked around. There was only one exit. The footsteps were coming from that direction. Then he noticed an old maintenance tunnel hidden behind a large steam pipe. Its rusty door was slightly open. Without making a sound, Ethan slipped inside. The narrow tunnel was dark and filled with dust. He carefully pulled the door almost closed behind him. Only a tiny gap remained. Through it, he watched the two men enter the boiler room. Lawson looked directly at the open locker. His face turned pale. "It's gone," he whispered. The warden remained strangely calm. He slowly looked around the room before speaking. "Lock down the prison." Lawson nodded. "And Officer Carter?" The warden's expression never changed. "Find him." Every alarm inside Blackstone State Prison suddenly began blaring. Heavy steel doors slammed shut across every building. Red emergency lights flashed through the hallways. Employees reached for their radios in confusion. The prison had entered full lockdown. Only this time. It wasn't because of the inmates. It was because someone was hunting Ethan Carter. The emergency alarms echoed through every hallway of Blackstone State Prison. Heavy steel doors locked one after another. Officers rushed to their assigned posts, believing there was a dangerous inmate on the loose. Only a handful of people knew the truth. The person they were searching for was Officer Ethan Carter. Hidden inside the old maintenance tunnel, Ethan held the box of evidence tightly. Every document inside could expose years of corruption. If the wrong people found him first, the truth might disappear forever. He waited until the voices faded. Then he quietly followed the narrow tunnel, using only a small flashlight. After several minutes, he found an old maintenance exit that opened outside the prison fence. The door had not been used in years, but it still worked. For the first time that night, Ethan was outside Blackstone. He did not go home. The anonymous phone call and the photograph left on his car had already warned him that someone was watching his family. Instead, he drove to a trusted friend, retired FBI Special Agent Robert Hayes. Ethan had met Robert years earlier during a prison security training program. Robert had built a reputation for honesty and careful investigations. When Robert opened the door, he immediately noticed Ethan's worried face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Ethan placed the box on the kitchen table. "I found something much worse." For the next hour, Ethan explained everything. The shredded documents. The missing records. The hidden locker. Michael Turner's unfinished letter. The suspicious payments. The inspection schedules. The flash drive. Robert listened without interrupting. Finally, he picked up the flash drive. "If this contains what these papers suggest," he said, "this isn't just a prison problem. This could become a federal criminal investigation." The next morning, Robert contacted the appropriate federal authorities through official channels and arranged for the evidence to be turned over securely. Digital specialists examined the flash drive. Its files confirmed what Ethan had feared. There were years of financial records, internal emails, inspection reports, and security logs showing that several prison officials had worked together to hide misconduct. Records had been altered before inspections. Public funds had been misused through fake contracts. Honest employees who raised concerns had been pressured to leave or ignored. One file stood out above all the others. It contained a recorded meeting in which senior officials discussed destroying records before investigators could see them. The evidence was clear. Within days, federal investigators obtained search warrants. They entered Blackstone State Prison with court authorization. Computers were secured. Financial records were collected. Office files were seized. Several current and former officials were taken into custody to face the legal process. As news spread across the country, people were shocked. For years, Blackstone had been praised as a model prison. Now investigators were uncovering a very different story. The state announced an independent review of prison operations. New leadership was appointed. Security procedures were strengthened. Financial controls were updated. Employees were given safer ways to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Investigators also reopened the case of Officer Michael Turner. After reviewing old records and interviewing new witnesses, they discovered that Michael had quietly preserved evidence before leaving the prison. Although many questions about his disappearance remained unanswered, the information he protected played a key role in exposing the corruption years later. His family was informed of the investigation's findings and thanked for their patience throughout the long process. Marcus Hill also recovered after receiving medical treatment. During interviews with investigators, he provided additional information about how certain prison rules had been manipulated over the years. His statements helped investigators better understand how the scheme had operated. Months later, Ethan returned to Blackstone. The prison looked the same from the outside. The same concrete walls. The same watchtowers. The same heavy gates. But inside, things had changed. New officers were being trained to follow procedures carefully. Independent inspectors now had direct access to records. Evidence rooms were monitored more closely. Most importantly, employees understood that reporting wrongdoing was a responsibility, not a risk. As Ethan walked through the main corridor, he stopped for a moment. The building was quiet. He thought about Michael Turner. One honest officer had tried to tell the truth years earlier. His warning had almost been erased. But in the end, the evidence survived. The corruption scandal they tried to hide had finally been brought into the open, not because of one dramatic moment, but because a few people chose honesty over silence. Ethan looked down the long prison hallway, took one deep breath, and continued forward, knowing that protecting the truth was one of the most important jobs anyone could have. Thank you for watching Crimythrax. If you enjoy real true crime stories, mysterious investigations, and stories that uncover the truth, follow Crimythrax for more. Until the next story, stay curious.